Much as its title implies, Everything Everywhere All at Once is a thematically dense movie, covering not only matters of the Asian American experience, but issues surrounding femininity, masculinity, sexuality, classism, family, generational trauma, destiny, your greater place in the world, and whether or not that even exists in the first place. It's a lot to take in. But, thanks to the magic of the internet, even the most general of Google searches can give you a relevant, digestible hot take you can parrot back at your friends to impress them at parties. But while the Google strap may take care of the broader thematic brushstrokes of the film, there is one aspect I haven't seen discussed much, if at all. The subtle yet very distinct difference between slackers in Asian culture versus in the West. Before delving too deep into things, let's put on the nice boy cap for a second and clarify that the character of Evelyn Wong is not a slacker, nor are most people labeled with that term. She's a capable parent that's able to maintain some semblance of a relationship with her daughter. She runs a laundromat with her husband that's apparently popping enough to warrant inviting all patrons to her New Year's party. She's played by Michelle Yeoh. She's got a lot going on for her. And of course, by the standards of society, that isn't enough. She more or less tolerates all the people in her life. She continually shoehorns her own hobbies into the laundromat because that's the only way she's able to accept her job.
Sorry. My wife confuses her hobbies for businesses.
Her dad remains on her case about her life choices just in general. It's a big mood. No longer being the spry young woman she once was, Evelyn has grown to accept that the dreams she once chased with such vigor aren't paying off in spades the way she thought they would. See, dreams are a fickle mistress in that while they can take just a second to fall in love with, they can take years to realize that you've fallen out of love with them. A lot of Evelyn's character epitomizes not only the malaise of adulthood, but that very specific malaise of an Asian adult not living up to the expectations established for yourself by others. This feeling of unaccomplishment and isolation created from a dream that less blossomed and more fermented after so many years of believing things will work themselves out eventually. It is a feeling I'm only becoming more familiar with the older I get. Having escaped the existential dread that is being in my 20s only to be thrust into the completely different beast that is my 30s, I've been forced to face the inevitable yet nevertheless harsh reality that people in my social circles are beginning to drift away from each other. Without the common ground of school to bind us together, people are beginning to pursue and excel in different career paths, start families, move on to live in different cities, states, or even countries. The amount of common ground I'm able to maintain with them disappearing in real time as I realize that simple conversations of games, TV shows, or movies is barely enough to nurture these past relationships, all while I continue to flounder as I struggle to find what I want to do in my own life. To see my fellow millennials, a generation that was once infamous for being the butt of every unironic "they're destroying the economy" sensationalist headline, drop by the wayside, making forward-progressing compromise after compromise until their lifestyle becomes near indistinguishable from the boomer generations that were persecuting them just years prior is... I don't know how to feel. All the while, the greater world as a whole has come to take these initial insecurities of my generation and manipulate them into these monetizable things. Hobbies no longer carry any weight unless you find a way to flip everything and make a profit. Hard work is only seen as a true virtue if you work yourself to the bone. Crunch culture and the grind set become part of the everyday vernacular because simply enjoying your place in life is seen as being complacent and lazy.
You're a slacker.
This mentally despicable and spiritually grating mindset turned lifestyle is culminated no better than in the form of the yuppie, or for all you fellow Asians out there, the yappie. A take on the former shorthand for young urban professional, the yappie exists as a fringe group of sorts to the yuppie, now shorthand for young Asian professional. On the surface, both are inoffensively droll concepts, just another archetype of person akin to being goth or, I don't know, a furry. There's nothing inherently bad about the yappie. And if anything, the face value of it exemplifies how hard work and perseverance will lead to success, stability, and the subject of bragging rights whenever your parents attend family get-togethers. If you haven't seen the downside and inherent annoyance of all of this by now, this video definitely isn't for you. Please leave a strictly worded comment below as you watch this from your cubicle big enough to accommodate your overflowing Funko Pop collection while comfortably knowing you still have enough time in your lunch break to switch to a video that's more your speed. Because while the yappy lifestyle fulfills the expectations set upon by family, it fails to address the needs of your own. It treats milestones as items to be easily checked off a list for successful mediocrity without allowing even a second for critical thinking as to why such things are on this checklist to begin with. Yes, solid education will lead to better prospects at jobs, spouses, and houses, but I don't know, man, it all seems like a raw deal if you're too busy putting the process on a pedestal to even figure out what you're going to do on your own time after that. And that's where the idealized yappy life begins to fall apart. So much of what's associated with the lifestyle is the process. The books, the podcasts, the life hacks. An entire industry built off of tips and tricks on what you're supposed to do to attain that sweet, sweet nectar of parental braggability tokens. That once that nectar is attained and those tokens are redeemed, you're at a loss. So much of your headspace has been taken up with that grind set that the only thing you wish to redeem your tokens on is more grind set. You become those boring couples that spend their quarantine months becoming a fucking plant mom or learning how to make bread. Like, shit, how do you guys settle on the most homogenous hobbies possible? This is all to say that any yappies praising everything everywhere all at once without the slightest shred of irony, you're allowed to enjoy what you want, but just know that I fucking hate you. Seeing the yappy crowd praise everything everywhere was like the second coming of seeing celebrities and rich people praise Parasite. Like, yeah, media, especially media made on a smaller budget, has every right to be enjoyed by as many people as possible, and if a thing ends up being a sleeper success, then who am I to argue? But also, there's a sense of insincerity about it, a feeling that you're enjoying the right thing for the wrong reasons. And you wanna know why? It's because this movie wasn't made for you. It was made for me, a fucking loser slacker reverse yappy. Everything Everywhere All at Once both breaks the mold of the model minority while also laying out its innumerous pitfalls, bare on the screen for all to see. When we're first introduced to Evelyn, the movie makes it clear that it wishes to differentiate her current life to not only the life her father wishes for her, but the lives of all the other Evelyns in the multiverse. As Evelyn and in turn the audience bears witness to her untapped potential as seen in other alternate universes, we begin to further buy into the false sell that our mundane, boring Evelyn is a person to be pitied. Her life not fitting the cookie-cutter worldviews of success, and as such must be a failure. You're initially set up to see Evelyn's alternate lives as alluring, and yet each one in time comes to show its own shortcomings in a classic grass is always greener deal. But while the movie does touch upon success and the isolation still possible from such positions, its more immediate theme is meant for the dregs of society. The burnout losers unworthy of parental bragging at family get-togethers because they live a lifestyle so disconnected from others' expectations that it comes off as incomprehensibly wrong and immoral to anyone who isn't them. When Everything Everywhere first came out, a lot of people began praising it as the superior Doctor Strange movie, when really it's the superior version of Shang-Chi. A solid, untapped potential story without the on-the-nosiness or half-baked character arcs. But I think what damned Shang-Chi besides being a late-era Marvel movie was how thematically stretched it was. It wanted to be the relatable bum with the Heart of Gold movie, on top of being a superhero movie, as well as something else to offer the Asian American crowd in this post-Crazy Rich Asians world. The latter being a big part of what led to Shang-Chi's flash-in-the-pan but ultimately just okayedness. Ironically enough, the real-life pressures of the model minority ended up seeping into the Shang-Chi movie itself, to the point that it ends up psyching itself out and sabotaging itself in the process. Or at the least getting lost in the realm of other mediocre Marvel movies, which, if I may be an overly critical Asian dad for a second, might as well be a failure. How Shang-Chi begins, and what's probably its most interesting aspect, is how it aims to be a slacker movie for the Asian American crowd. We have the titular character raised to have big aspirations in direct relation to his family, and yet in the present day we find he's living a mundane life as a parking valet alongside Awkwafina. The two are clearly capable of more, and yet due to circumstances outside their control, they remain in this painfully stagnant lifestyle. It makes for this really interesting dichotomy between the mundane and the fantastic, and yet it fails to get this point across because its ultimate goal is to get things on track to being a superhero movie again. Chop chop, drop all these character introspections, we need a bland, bombastic CG fight scene, stat! Shang-Chi himself can't stay a reluctant underachiever because we know he was literally born and raised to be more. Even Awkwafina gets the fast pass to destined greatness because the movie is uncomfortable sidelining the comedic relief in a movie meant to celebrate Asian excellence. Everyone has a higher meaning to pursue, and if you don't, it either means you aren't trying hard enough or you just don't want it. Wait, was it? Compare this to slacker movies aimed at broader audiences, and you begin to see where the differences in execution and culture begin to stack. Your typical protagonists in a Kevin Smith core movie are listless in such a pure, undignified manner. They have no future prospects or interests in one because they're convinced there's nothing else for them outside the life they already live. Their connections in life are limited to those directly in front of them, who themselves appear unhindered by any loftier ideas outside of their immediate periphery, because to do so puts their comfortable life of neutrality at risk. The tagline for Napoleon Dynamite is literally, he's out to prove he's got nothing to prove. I bring these movies up not to deem one better than the other, but to demonstrate how Everything Everywhere All at Once takes the slacker creed and applies it to an Asian American lifestyle in such a way that Shang-Chi only tepidly hints at. What separates Everything Everywhere and Shang-Chi is their very distinct attitude towards the model minority. I've already thrown that term around in this video, so let's get the Wikipedia definition out of the way before working back to the nitty-gritty. A model minority is a minority demographic, whether based on ethnicity, race, or religion, whose members are perceived as achieving a higher degree of socioeconomic success than the population average, thus serving as a reference group to outgroups. So people of color in positions of power or prestige, whether that be singers, athletes, astronauts, whatever, though the term is less used to identify success and more as a measuring stick for the rule makers in question to prove that the system is not rigged, and as long as you play by the rules, you too can be one of the good ones. Shang-Chi's approach to the slacker genre feels more like simple window dressing than a sincere attempt at providing a specifically Asian American perspective to the genre. It actively embraces this idea presented by the model minority. Roots to problems are traced back to a couple bad eggs and not a more systemic issue, and people in the lowest rung of society need merely pull themselves up by their bootstraps to be as successful as Shang-Chi or Awkwafina. You've seen the song and dance dozens of times, so to see it once again presented to you by Marvel by way of Disney of all corporations should be indication enough that more can be discussed on the topic, as long as the creative team in question is willing to get their hands dirty. Everything Everywhere All at Once is an intentionally messy movie. Its story is an interwoven, multi-generational, drastic, absurdist adventure. By getting their hands dirty, writer-director team Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert mold such thematically complex characters to the point that they're able to take their protagonist Evelyn Wong, a character who we have no trouble judging as an immigrant woman living below her potential, and reframing her entire life by movie's end, convincing us that we were the wrong ones to think that in the first place. Like your prototypical slacker movies, Everything Everywhere embraces their underperforming main character's lifestyle. Where they differ, however, is in their frame of reference for such a line of thinking. In something like Clerks, we follow a cast of lovable do-nothings acknowledge and continue with their slovenly lifestyle. Meanwhile, Everything Everywhere doesn't have Evelyn really accept her life as a life unlived. Rather, the movie itself convinces the audience that any life is a life well lived, including the yappy. At the cost of completely ruining my thesis and throughline of this video essay, I believe the viewer should know that while my own feelings of the yappy are less than ideal, it would be misleading to state that such a lifestyle is one that's all that bad. If anything, it's worse! That's right, you bozos! On this YouTube channel, we punch up, get your grindset ass back in your Teslas and go back to flexing at Valley Fair. This is an Eastridge only mall zone! I double down on this not only for my own personal satisfaction, but because Everything Everywhere All at Once does show signs of having a similar dissatisfaction with the have their shit together crowd, mainly in the form of the Alpha universe. While Alpha Waymond does serve as the movie's inciting incident and a quick and messy way to exposition dump all its science fiction talk efficiently, he and his universe also serve as the movie's surrogate yappy, the cousin at the dinner table that's reached the pinnacle of their parents' expectations and then some, leaving you with nothing better than to just awkwardly pretend to go to the bathroom for the first time like a f***ing dumbass. His introduction literally involves him giving an elevator pitch of his worldview while putting the moves on Evelyn and giving her not one, but two obnoxious phone earpieces like some corporate douche. And Alpha Waymond isn't the only one. The entirety of its denizens are framed as a people that are always winning, even if it's only on a personal level. Alongside Alpha Waymond's no-nonsense badassery, Alpha Evelyn is a super genius that developed universe-hopping technology, Alpha Gong Gong is this cutthroat old man with a powered armor suit, and even their kid Joy was able to reach her full potential as essentially a god that can burst, jump, and manipulate reality at will. It may not exactly be a power utilized for good, but the fact remains that the alpha version of the Wongs are really cool. Which makes things kinda sucky but also a bit validating when we find out that Alpha Waymond ends up being the worst. When he first meets Evelyn, he is going all in on her being this chosen one, just really gassing her up until Evelyn not only believes in what he's selling, but that she can provide what Alpha Waymond is looking for. And that's a very clear distinction we have to make. Alpha Waymond isn't looking to enrich the life of a seemingly unremarkable woman. He's looking to find someone that can be of use to him specifically, and the second that he believes this Evelyn cannot be that, he is absolutely ready to abandon her, universe and all.
No, wait! Let me try again! Alpha Waymond.
But what really makes this betrayal hit is how downplayed it is. This isn't like some Disney-level heel turn where the likable yet inexplicably evilly designed person ends up being the bad guy. It's more that it just happens. You kind of see this early on when Alpha Wayman refers to one universe as a burner universe, and you're like, that's kind of weird, but this dialogue is really dense, so I can't focus on that right now. On top of that, whenever he dips from the plot, he only ever comes back to give verbal headpats to ensure Evelyn stays under his thumb. It's all very nice guy manipulative. And yet he sees all of this as justified because he has a certain level of detachment from others who he can't benefit from in a way that just screams yappy. Don't fall for this man's riz, Evelyn! He's in the middle of Rich Dad Poor Dad and will readily recommend it to you any chance he gets! But what really brings home Alpha Wayman's, and in turn the Alphas as a whole, dirtbag way of thinking is this scene. Mask off time, losers! Shortly after Alpha Wayman knocks out the security guards and Evelyn forces him to further exposit, he begins this very nostalgic preamble about the past and how Jobu Tupaki is the sole threat to all this change they've been presented with.
Our institutions are crumbling. Nobody trusts their neighbor anymore. And you stay up at night wondering to yourself,
How can we get back?
It almost feels like a political speech, how readily he takes Evelyn's insecurities about the future to frame this unknown entity as an absolute threat. Now, it's never made clear whether or not Alpha Wayman himself believes what he's pitching here, but at best, he's further manipulating Evelyn into fighting her own daughter, and at worst, he actually believes this nostalgic, idealized past that doesn't exist. And if it's the latter, it only further feeds into the belief that Alpha Wayman's image of success is only seen as successful as long as all the other universes exist to compare it to. His care over the other universes is only relative to his own well-being. It's all very impersonal and rude in how curtly he plays everything off, but also I know people that are exactly this. Quit doing this! I don't know why people want to be about this life so badly. It's family. It's because of family. A big part of the Yappy lifestyle's allure is just how intrinsically connected to family it is. When it comes to comparing the Yuppie and Yappy, there's a certain baggage that immigrant families undergo that's just different enough to justify the distinction. Naturally, our parents enter a new country for change not only for themselves, but for their children. And yet once those children grow up, their life path is limited to either believing their parents made the right choice or not. The decisions of the children are so intertwined with reinforcing whether or not their parents' sacrifices were worthwhile that it's almost a no-brainer to simply accept the life path your parents have mapped out for you, even if it's one you don't necessarily agree with. Even with how densely packed it can get, Everything Everywhere All at Once isn't so naive as to attribute one's own place in life as a position deemed by destiny, but rather a long string of chaos chained together in the lanyard of life. Families are not a long line of iterations that get better with time, and destiny does not exist. Because with everything else happening, it would be lazy to say it does. Everything Everywhere understands this, and yet rather than going the easy route of full nihilism or finding a simple band-aid solution to all the problems it willingly runs down, it can only offer a word of advice.
be kind. Especially when we don't know what's going on.
The movie ends not with a dramatic physical change, but with a return to the norm under a different frame of mind. Evelyn and Wayman don't drop their careers in favor of something more glamorous or even more fitting to any loftier dreams they may have had. Instead, we end on an almost somber note, with the larger change being less a literal one and more an emotional one. There is no literal change to the life of the Wongs because to have one would be to say that their current life is one not worth living, when that is far from the truth. Even when your life is a listless droll of day-to-day mundanities, that isn't to say it's any lesser because of that. Everything Everywhere All at Once succeeds as a slacker movie not only because it defiantly touts its mundane protagonist as anything but a slacker, but also because it unflinchingly frames the more textbook successful not as these giant goblin-y villains or even villains to begin with. It frames success not as a single goal to aspire to, but to question. Question the status quo. Question your relationships. Question how you view the world. Just as long as you don't question yourself. Because no matter how others may see you, you know you're doing great.